Strap yourselves in, this is going to be a long one. Alright, so this is a bit of an odd video, but this is basically my ultimate Star Wars bucket list. These are partially in order of unhingedness, from least unhinged to totally crazy, mostly because I don't want to lose you guys right off the bat. My disclaimer is that these are simply ideas that I'd like to see Star Wars explore. Some of them seem like they could be achievable, others I really don't expect Star Wars to go anywhere near, but there's no reason we can't have some fun with this. So first off, the new Jedi Order. I try not to complain too much about the sequel trilogy in these videos I'm making, not because I'm worried about saying anything bad about them, but more so because I have a lot of thoughts and I feel like my personal discussion of the sequel trilogy would require its own video to really cover the bases and properly address the problems I have with it. And I already know I have a bit of a rant about it later in this video. But first off, I feel like something Star Wars really needs to address, and they've started to put in some of the pieces already, but they aren't fully there yet, is the new Jedi Order in a post-Luke world. What I mean by that is, given how the sequel trilogy shook up the Star Wars canon, the state of the new Jedi Order is now a massive gray area, and it's currently unclear how this, in my frank opinion, major problem will be resolved. As it stands, Disney has several pots on the fire. Of course, we've already gotten to see Luke attempt to recreate the Jedi Order, but his version in the Disney canon is a far cry from the Jedi Order we left behind in the Legends canon. And worse still, with the advent of Kylo Ren, we also know that no matter how the gaps of Luke's new Jedi Order are filled in, it's doomed to failure. This is why I say a post-Luke world. After everything the sequel trilogy has erased, and in some cases ruined about Luke Skywalker, intriguing angles or not, he is no longer a viable option to fill in the role he once played in the Legends canon. And the same goes for basically the whole OG trio. Each and every one of their character traits, arcs, and trajectories have been altered so greatly that they no longer have a place in the very story that was supposed to belong to them. But I'm getting off track. It's clear, and I get the vibe that Dave Filoni is aware, some kind of replacement needs to be made for the Jedi Order to properly rise from the ashes once more. As far as viable replacements go, there's maybe Cal Kestis, though admittedly he's probably the least viable option on this list, considering a major part of his storyline in the first game was specifically choosing not to try and rebuild the Jedi Order, as he had a vision that if he did, it would be stamped out by the Empire. And I haven't finished Jedi Survivor yet, so I don't know where he ends up at the end of that game. So forgive me if thinking he could be a viable option is just really stupid, but all I'm saying is there's no reason he couldn't start one after the Empire is taken down. Then there's Ezra and Ahsoka. I'm not totally sure which would necessarily be a better specific choice, as Ahsoka has real experience and is already training Sabine, and naturally at the time of writing we don't currently know what's become of Ezra, but he does at least have some of those Luke connections, like being the exact same age and having been born on the same day and such, that suggests to me that Filoni may have had him in mind already as a sort of Luke Skywalker adjacent or replacement, though that remains to be seen. And finally, is probably the most obvious choice, which is Rey. I have a few mixed feelings about this, though not so much because I don't like Rey or anything like that, more so just the fact that it kind of bothers me that the new Jedi Order is literally about 30 years behind schedule now, which is why I keep trying to find some kind of earlier new Jedi Order separate, but possibly concurrent to Luke's, but the sequel trilogy really gets in the way of that. Anyway, there's plenty to speculate on how Rey's new Jedi Order might go. We've at least already gotten to see a few snippets of its potential in the LEGO Star Wars Holiday Specials, which actually brings me to one of my next little ideas I'd like to see. Please canonize the LEGO lore. I know it sounds dumb, and I know it's extremely doubtful to happen, and I know there's no way to canonize the totally unserious shenanigans the LEGO parodies of Palpatine and Vader get into, but there are so many great nuggets of lore and storytelling in several of the LEGO projects that it just kind of bothers me that absolutely none of it is canon. I'm sure we'll get to explore more of Rey's new Jedi Order in the future. That, at least, is something I feel pretty confident about. I just hope it's possible to keep Finn a part of it, because right now, Finn being an actual Jedi is still just barely canon. It's like word of mouth canon, and the only representation we have of it existing at all is Finn saying,
"Rey, I never told you when."
So what was it?
What?
What you were going to tell me?
When?
When you were sinking in the sand, you said, "I never told you."
I'll tell you later.
You mean when Poe's not here?
Yeah?
We're gonna die in sand burrows and we're all keeping secrets?
and the various stories in the non-canon LEGO specials. Furthermore, while watching LEGO Star Wars The Freemaker Adventures, which is a brilliant show, by the way. I highly recommend it to any Star Wars fan. Of course, being LEGO, it does skew a little bit young, but probably not as young as you're thinking if you haven't watched it yet. Even regardless of that, it has enough humor and depth and plays with enough interesting concepts that is really something to enjoy for most Star Wars fans. Plus, if you're a fan of Star Wars Rebels, there's some, nods and returning characters in there as well. I think, now don't quote me on this, I don't know if this is actually true or not, I haven't looked into it, but I'm pretty sure that show was also the first time we ever got to see General Syndulla, as in Hera as a general. In her little jacket or whatever, but I don't know if that's the case because I know she also appeared in Squadrons, but Squadrons definitely happened after Freemaker Adventures. But as I was saying, while watching the show, I became enthralled by the establishment of the Force Builders, who were an ancient Force-sensitive order that were devoted to creating the finest art, architecture, and starships. All I'm saying is that even taken outside of the context of LEGO, this creates a great in-universe explanation for all of the massive and fantastical art and architecture found in the world of Star Wars. And since we're on the topic, you know what else I'd like to see in a canon live-action project? The Freemakers themselves. I realize this is about as silly or out there of an idea as with officially canonizing any of the LEGO stories or content, but I think it would be so much fun to see the Freemakers running around in a live-action setting, having to go up against Graballa the Hutt, among other things. And bear with me for this next one. Retain the lore for the Kyber Saber Crystal, and allow Rowan to retain the Force ability to do that thing. You know the one. That thing where LEGO Force users get their ships blown up and then rebuild them in the middle of space. I know it sounds crazy, and it's totally ridiculous. I know. But just imagine, you get live-action Rowan in some sort of dogfight, flying around in space, and then disaster strikes. His ship gets shot and explodes. Rowan is dead. Everyone is shocked. Well, everyone except for Xander and Cordy. Suddenly, from within the smoke, a totally different ship flies out, piloted by Rowan Freemaker. Later, after the fight, he explains how he did it, and we get to see a scene of him in the cockpit at the moment of the explosion. A split second before he is hit, he senses it about to happen. He closes his eyes and focuses in on the Force and what he knows from being a mechanic. He's able to shield himself, creating a bubble within the Force just as his ship explodes around him. Then, still protected by the Force, he quickly uses it to rearrange all the pieces of his broken ship. Bolts and screws and parts swirl around him until they've formed into the brand new ship he uses to fly back out of there. Obviously, this is one of those Force powers that is way too OP to really be recognized as a real canon Force power. I have no doubt that's why we never see it outside of LEGO. But here's my suggestion on that. Rowan can do it because he's a mechanic and because he's a spiritual successor to the Force Builders. The Force Builders were already a separate offshoot from the Jedi, so too are their teachings most likely. This would essentially be a Force Builder exclusive ability, making it so that Rowan would be really the only person who could do it in the modern age of the Rebellion or New Republic or whatever. Also, it would probably take up a lot of energy, so I doubt he'd be able to do it multiple times in one dogfight. Probably a one and done for like a week sort of thing. Still, at this point, I'd honestly be happy with just Rowan Freemaker existing canonically. Finn Unsquandered. This is going back a little bit to what I was saying about, Rey's new Jedi Order, but do I even need to discuss Finn? Like, seriously, I feel like the problems with Finn have been discussed so extensively already, including by John Boyega himself, that I shouldn't have to explain this one. Just finish the job you started, Star Wars. Make him a Jedi, canonically. I know LEGO already did, and I know I already discussed this there as well. At this point, I don't even know if Boyega is even willing to return to Finn. I know he said he's not in the past, though I think that changed at some point, but regardless, if he does ever return to the role, you would better do him justice, Disney. And I'll be honest, I don't care much if he and Rey get together or not. They should have been based on what was set up in The Force Awakens rather than Rey ditching him for an abusive partner like Kylo, but at this point, I don't know that Finn-Rey needs to happen. Rey's already proven herself to be fickle in that respect.
What do you recommend for someone whose friends ditched him?
Better friends?
But I digress. I'm not here to tear down Rey. And if she can be written better again, a relationship between her and Finn could make sense again. But all I'm really saying is, Disney, it's time to stop living in fear and letting it guide your every decision, especially with Star Wars. Don't be afraid to let a multiracial couple be the forefront of your flagship franchise. Heck, forget don't be afraid. That's what you should be doing and should have been doing from the start. This isn't the discussion I want to get into right now. I have another video planned for that. But seriously, the optics for the sequel trilogy and really Star Wars as a whole, especially post-Disney, for how they treat their characters of color is really bad. Bad enough that I literally made a list of every black character in Star Wars to see just how many of them are part of or heavily associated with the Empire and the dark side of the Force. Spoilers, it's most of them. But I digress. I'm sure complaints about what Disney did to Finn have been heard plenty of times before, and I'm not sure I have anything new to add to that conversation at this time, nor do I want to waste time in an already long video ranting about it, so I'll just move on. Restoration of the Old Republic. On the topic of Disney's diversity problem, it seems like the primary intention of the introduction of the High Republic may have been to help mediate that problem. Unfortunately, as fun and exploratory as the High Republic is, and forgive me if I don't handle this topic well, I still haven't gotten into the series yet, but I may have to soon. It lacks a bit of relevance, at least to me personally. It's a little hard to describe, and I have other personal beef that I'll get into in a bit, but the High Republic exists in a strange place of being right before the core of the Star Wars franchise, but also a ways after what I felt was a very relevant storytelling period that fulfilled a similar purpose and was separated enough that it had the freedom to mostly do whatever it wanted without being hampered by leading into the first two trilogies. And that's not the reason I have personal beef with the High Republic, though. In fact, on paper, I actually really appreciate what they've done. Adding more diversity is good, even though it doesn't really touch or affect the Star Wars mainstream. And it fills in a gap, creating an entire era of exploration in the process. Except, it doesn't fill a gap. The Old Republic isn't canon. Okay, so I'll admit, that's not totally true anymore. Which is also part of why I've eased up on my anger towards the High Republic. I'm now willing to give it more of a fair chance, because Disney did recently recanonize at least the era of the High Republic. To my knowledge, at the time of recording, I don't think any of the actual stories from the Old Republic have been recanonized, but the era, at least, exists. To, I guess, explain my feelings on the matter, I'll put it this way. The way things went after Disney bought Star Wars, it started with them decanonizing everything. Everything I loved about Star Wars.
Oh, it's beautiful.
The Old Republic, the new Jedi Order, and everything in between. All that was left were the original stories from the films themselves and Clone Wars. Well, not Clone Wars, the 2D animated series from Genndy Tartakovsky, but the Clone Wars. Side note, I honestly still don't know why the 2D Clone Wars series isn't considered canon. Like, I guess Grievous's cough got retconned, but as far as I can see, nothing in the 2D Clone Wars directly contradicts anything in the Clone Wars. And Ventress just kind of appeared in the Clone Wars without any of the context established in the 2D series, so I don't know. Removing the 2D series from canon is a strange choice to me. I still consider it essential. Anyway, basically, Disney broke everything. They told me, hey, see those things you love? They don't matter anymore. For a while, I was okay with it. I understood that they wanted to do a bit of a reset and streamline things. I was hesitant but hopeful. Then, The Force Awakens came out, and it stamped out all of my hope of retaining what was lost. Again, this is really a topic for another video, and this isn't to say The Force Awakens was bad, especially at the time I actually enjoyed it. I had fluctuating mixed feelings on The Last Jedi. It wouldn't really be until The Rise of Skywalker that I would finally formulate my full opinion on the sequel trilogy as a whole, and what it did to Star Wars. It's funny, too, because I can tell you the exact moment the sequel trilogy died for me. It wasn't the assassination of Han and Leia's relationship, or Rey's lightsaber reveal. It wasn't Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, or the Return of the Emperor, Rey being a Palpatine, or even the canonization of Reylo. It was this, right here. Ben! This line is so impressive. It's just one line, just a single word, but it was in that moment that I realized that now a whopping total of 5 of my favorite Star Wars characters were officially dead. Ben Skywalker, Anakin Solo, Jason and Jaina Solo, and Alana Solo. A single name that managed to kill 5 characters in one fell swoop. 5 characters that were essential to the future of Star Wars. And none of that is to mention that even The Force Awakens' story paled in comparison to the stories taking place in the same time frame in the Legends canon. I still remember, right after the whole thing happened, I had another friend that was into Star Wars, and he had asked me how I felt about it. I had admitted I was unsure, because I really loved and appreciated what had come before, and I didn't really like that they had decanonized everything. He more or less said that if it meant we got more Star Wars, did it really matter? At the time, I wasn't sure. I mean, he had a point. How could more Star Wars be worse than less Star Wars? The fact that Star Wars would live on in film again, rather than just a small scattering of books and the very occasional TV show, seemed like a good thing. But it wasn't. Star Wars had been broken, and not for the better. Then they announced the High Republic, a new era of the franchise that would explore new storytelling and allow their writers freedom to do whatever without having to worry about the confines of the saga stories. Except, they still hadn't fixed what they'd broken. When the High Republic was announced, the Old Republic was still decanonized. It literally didn't exist, and there wouldn't even be a canonical reference to it until the Sith Troopers in The Rise of Skywalker. So, I was mad. It felt insulting to me for Disney to take Star Wars away from me, invalidate what I loved about it, and then try to cram their crappy new version down my throat when I was still begging for them to fix what was broken. It's taken a long time, but they finally seem to be getting onto that path, and I know Filoni and Star Wars Rebels did a lot of good to tide me over until then. Still, I personally boycotted the High Republic for a long time for that reason. I'll give it a fair shot soon enough. I've spoken long enough about this. The tangent went on a little too long. I just want the Old Republic back. Give me Revan, give me Malgus, give me Satele Shan, I'll be happy. The legacy of the Force and the fate of the Jedi. I've been channeling a bit of my rage for the last few things I'd like to see, and I'm afraid that may not be going away just yet. Because now we've reached the core of my anger. I already mentioned it earlier, but those 5 characters, Ben Solo single-handedly killed, this is about their story. All I've ever wanted out of the future of Star Wars is some form of adaptation of the legacy of the Force and the fate of the Jedi. Outside of like Dark Disciple, these are far, far and away my favorite Star Wars stories. I'm not sure how much I want to say about them now because I'm hesitant to spoil these 12-year-old books, and I also plan on making videos about them later. But the stories they tell are so fun and so well written, they've honestly spoiled me a little bit. I keep going back to them because these days I often feel like it's hard to find good books, but these still stand the test of time. So there is a little bit of that white savior complex when Luke goes to a race of people and tells them that what they're doing in their way of life is wrong, but it's not as bad as some of those kinds of stories tend to be. Legacy of the Force is all about the rise of Darth Caedus, a Sith Lord who appears after having a vision of the future where he sees his daughter on a throne. His daughter will either become the Queen of the Jedi or the Queen of the Sith. In order to ensure she becomes the Queen of the Jedi, Caedus does what he has to get her there, even if it means corrupting himself and turning over to the dark side in the process. Fate of the Jedi is essentially a Star Wars Odyssey. Directly following the events of Legacy of the Force, Luke Skywalker is banished and sent into exile for the crimes of Darth Caedus, who had been part of the new Jedi Order. Luke goes on a journey with his son, Ben, following in Caedus' footsteps, to try and figure out where he went wrong and why he turned to the dark side. Meanwhile, other Jedi begin going insane, contracting some kind of disease that causes them to believe everyone around them has been replaced with an imposter. Fate of the Jedi also explores the Ones, and at some points goes hand in hand with those episodes exploring the Mortis gods in the Clone Wars. I have to say, I read these books around the same time those episodes aired, and the absolute thrill I got when I saw the daughter for the very first time, and having never once seen her before, I recognized her and Mortis. It's probably the most excited I've gotten from Clone Wars, and is definitely one of the reasons why those are some of my favorite episodes. Of course, in Clone Wars, we really only see the father, the daughter, and the son. Fate of the Jedi introduces the fourth, the bringer of chaos, Abeloth, the mother. I know it would probably take a while for us to get there, but of everything on this list, that may be what I want to see from Star Wars the most. I want to see the return of Darth Caedus and the return of Abeloth. There is a pretty decent adaptation of Legacy of the Force on YouTube by FanFilm, though unfortunately being only around 20 minutes, it doesn't cover the full breadth of the story. Still, it's fun if you're like me and desperate for any acknowledgement of the new Jedi Order. The Force Unleashed 3. First off, this is a pretty basic one, and another one that I don't really expect to happen. Or if it did, I imagine the final result would likely be very different from the original concept. But I'd still like to have some closure on the Force Unleashed series with the rebirth of the Force Unleashed 3. From what I've read, it seems the original idea for The Force Unleashed 3, before it was cancelled, involved a storyline in which after capturing Darth Vader at the end of the second game, Starkiller and co. on the Rogue Shadow were shot down by Boba Fett.
I am Boba Fett.
And became stranded on a dangerous planet. Starkiller would be forced to work together with Darth Vader to escape. Of course, Starkiller doesn't know if Vader can even be trusted, and later it would be revealed that the Emperor himself sent Boba Fett to prevent both Starkiller and Vader from escaping due to having his own scheme. Now, that's more or less what already existed in the story, and I don't have much new to add to that, except I had some ideas that it might be fun to use this as an excuse to introduce or possibly just tease the introduction of Ahsoka into the Force Unleashed series, as a way to kind of shepherd in my next silly idea, which is Starkillers, Dyads. This is a very loose plot concept at the moment, and of course if you've seen my Is Ezra Merrick video, you might have an inkling of what's in store already, but this is basically kind of the concept for fan fiction I was gonna write or something. I don't know. We never got out of the idea stage. So, just a full disclaimer. This isn't based off of any existing Star Wars story. This is just exclusively my own little crazy idea. So, following the events of Star Wars Rebels, Ahsoka Tano returns to Malachor 4, where she, followed by Mirai, is led to a new portal into the world between worlds. From here, she embarks on a spiritual journey that will change the course of her life. This would be a full-on journey with Starkiller and Ahsoka. After their initial meeting, they would end up joining forces for one reason or another. Starkiller would find himself sent to Mortis, where he uncovers a Force connection to the brother. At some point, Ahsoka and Starkiller come across the Emperor's new Sith assassin, who turns out to have been the original Starkiller. He hunts Ahsoka and clones Starkiller across the galaxy, and they have to fight or escape from him several times before finding a way to finally defeat him. And then, kind of the sequel to that idea is Starkillers, Future of the Force. So this next one might sound a little crazy, as if that last one didn't. And for a while, I had it on my list of crackpot dream theories, but the more rumors I hear about both the future of Ahsoka as well as Dave Filoni's upcoming film, the more I start to wonder if something at least similar could actually come to pass. And I had written this before watching episode 4 of Ahsoka. I had already known some of the stuff that was going to happen in episode 5 involving the world between worlds, but I wasn't expecting it to get introduced at the end of episode 4, so that also plays a role into me thinking that this might be more viable than I initially thought it was when I came up with this idea. Of course, it won't be exact, because much of what my idea stems from heavily involves the Legends canon, but you never know. So the idea in a nutshell is actually not too dissimilar to the LEGO Star Wars Holiday Special, just a little more involved and not centered around Rey. In that holiday special, Rey went to some planet and found some magic artifact that allowed her to travel through time and junk, and she has the opportunity to meet Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and various other famous canon characters. That's about where the similarities between the holiday special and my silly idea end, though. See, what I'd like to see is a Star Wars adventure across time and space, largely orchestrated by the world between worlds, in case my prior idea wasn't a dead giveaway. I cannot explain to you just how much hype I experienced when Dave Filoni introduced it way back during Rebels. It's basically a device that can single-handedly fix all of the current problems with Star Wars in any multitude of ways Filoni may see fit, without just hard rebooting as they did before. See, my problem is, I love the Legends canon too much. There were so many characters that I just adored that are now dead because of the sequel trilogy and the Disney canon reboot. There's still hope for characters like Mara Jade, but Ben Skywalker? We've got a new Jason, but where's Jaina? And we could still maybe get Tenel Ka and Tahiri and Alana and whatnot, but the whole new Jedi Order has been set back by about 30 years. Not to mention I had been hoping, initially when the World Between Worlds was introduced, that it might softly recanonize Legends by suggesting that somehow someone, likely the Emperor, if not a farther future entity, tampering with the World Between Worlds, or may have been the actual cause of the Disney canon. So it was the Legends canon, then somebody used the World Between Worlds to mess with it, resulting in enough alterations that the continuity of the galaxy went in a different direction. It wouldn't solve my personal problems with the Disney canon, but it would at least give an in-universe explanation for the change and pay respect to what came before, rather than simply cutting it off at the knees, much like the way that, quite ironically, J.J. Abrams' Star Trek films respected the original canon and created a new branch to explore, rather than overwriting it entirely. The way he chose to handle that film, and have an in-universe event that altered the continuity, while both paying homage to and acknowledging what came before, gave him a sandbox to play with while not undermining or invalidating the existing lore that fans had grown to love. And you know what? Even now, Star Trek still perpetuates that original canon. They're still making shows that exist within that original continuity rather than erasing everything just to go with the version in the world Abrams created. Star Trek respects their past while charging forward into the future. Dave Filoni clearly has a deep reverence and respect for the history of Star Wars, but I'm not sure I can say the same about Disney or some of the others that have been working on building the new world of Star Wars. But I digress. Put simply, what I'd like to see for this idea is something a little like this. The story would take place sometime after my silly Starkillers story, because of course I want Starkiller and Ahsoka teamed up again. I'm not sure exactly who the villain is. It's likely someone new or possibly an existing villain from the Star Wars Legacy era, but something or someone in the future is messing around with time in the world between worlds. Now, I should note, I'm still in the process of reading Star Wars Legacy, so there may be some elements of that story that I'm not privy to that may limit what I imagine the viability of this idea to be. But with that said, Cade Skywalker somehow becomes aware of this villain's tampering. Perhaps things start changing and he somehow is able to perceive the changes, possibly as a result of being a descendant of the Chosen One, or maybe he's informed by some of his Force Ghost friends who are noticing the changes in the Force, or more likely, maybe on some adventure he stumbles across what this villain has been doing. I haven't thought super hard about it, but somehow he figures out something is wrong and gets pulled into the world between worlds to handle it. Could be pulled in by happenstance or possibly pulled in by Ahsoka and Starkiller. I think there are a few ways the story could go, to be honest. And depending on who Merrick turns out to be in the Ahsoka series may also affect the direction, or at least where Starkiller comes from. This could either be a story that takes place starting in the Legends canon, which was my original idea for it, and the final result shifting everything into the Disney canon, or it could take place starting in the Disney canon and be used to either shift things back into the Legends canon while retaining some of the new characters introduced in Disney's continuity, like the Ghost Crew, Mando and Rey and Finn, etc., or it could be used to just mash both continuities together and take the best from both of them. Regardless of the final outcome, I'm basically imagining this as like the Avengers or Spider-Verse of Star Wars. I'm talking Cade travels all these different times and gathers up a crew along the way. Ahsoka Tano, Starkiller, the OG trio and their children, Ben Skywalker, Jaina and Alana Solo, Tahiri, Jagged Fell, Ghost Crew, Cal Kestis, Sotil Shan, and Revan. You know, all the cool kids. Though, I do recognize it may be hard to fit all of them in the same room, let alone the same story. I also think this is where the Freemakers should be introduced into live action. It might also be fun to see them appear as like actual Lego people somehow, but although I think it would be funny, I'd rather just see them in live action for something like this. This is basically the ultimate culmination of everything I've ever wanted from Star Wars post-Disney, so it's definitely the most out there ideas and the most grab bag, kid in a candy store, but like I said, there's no reason we can't have fun just for the sake of it. Also, just a minor note that I didn't mention when I originally recorded this, but I believe in my original kind of version of this silly idea. I think the villain was actually supposed to be Abeloth, or at least Abeloth was meant to appear, because, you know, she's a bringer of chaos, and I believe it's stated that she has, like, reset the universe a couple of times or something, which is part of the reason why the ones needed to trap her or whatever. And so basically the core idea around what like this event would be Abeloth returns and is, you know, trying to reset the universe again, or is causing a universe resetting event. And then that's kind of like the catalyst that causes all this to happen, and the universe does reset into, you know, the Disney canon, or, you know, depending on which version you're going for, it could also just reset into the regular canon. But when I came up with this idea, I mostly was considering it going into the Disney canon as opposed to being vice versa. So in the end, I just want what we had and what we lost to not just be forgotten or thrown away. Star Wars is a massive galaxy filled with rich storytelling and Han Solo fighting an otter. All Star Wars has to do is actually use it. I mean, well, they don't have to use the otter, but it's fine to make something new out of Star Wars, but stop trying to retread the same water, but in a way that's lesser or doesn't work. We didn't need Jedha or Exegol when we already had Tython and Korriban. I'm just glad Tython and Korriban are still canon. Anyway, I've taken up so much time already, so I won't try to drag out this ending much longer. Here are some last minute honorable mentions that I either thought of too late or didn't feel I had enough to say to feature in this video. The Yuzhong Vong, an actual adaptation of Dark Disciple. It's nice that we got the HKs back, and maybe it's a little silly, but I'd love to see the YVH droid in canon. They're basically like the Terminator for Star Wars. And I kind of mentioned it, kind of didn't, but more diversity in general, not just on the Empire. Also, it would be cool if we got Star Wars 1313. I know that's another one that's kind of like probably never going to happen, but, you know, I can dream. This one's a bit weird, and I will go a little bit more in depth into it. So, the old cartoon series Droids was not a very good show. In fact, it was very boring. I tried to watch through the... I had a DVD of it when I was a kid that I used to watch all the time. I tried to watch the rest of the series at one point when it was on Disney Plus, and it is so boring. And I know that there are kind of jokes out there about how there's that scavenger character who's a lot like Rey. And my personal favorite, and the one episode that I grew up with involving Kylo Ren, I don't care that much about Jan Tosh, who was in that episode. He can come back if he wants, but, you know, I also think it would be funny to see to see somehow they adapt, like, get a season of Bad Batch where they just merge the characteristics of Jan Tosh from Droids into Hunter. It's mostly just because they both have the Rambo thing going on. They look similar, so I did kind of have a small theory for a while that maybe, but no, that doesn't seem to be the case at all, and I digress. But basically, when they introduced Kylo Ren for the first time, they gave us his name, I raised an eyebrow because, you know, Kylo Ren sounds very similar to famed space pirate from Star Wars Droids, Kybo Ren. And of course, Kybo Ren is absolutely ridiculous, although he does have a ginger sidekick, which is interesting. A ginger sidekick in a stormtrooper gear, I might add, although Kylo Ren's ginger sidekick leads the stormtroopers rather than wearing their armor. But, you know, basically what I'm saying is I need a showdown between Kybo Ren and Kylo Ren, and it needs to be absolutely hilarious. In fact, that would be a fun thing to do in, like, Lego. But I digress. That's my last honorable mention, which honestly really should have made it into this video, but I kept forgetting to include it, so now it's stuck as an honorable mention. Also, fix the Grand Inquisitor's head. What happened with that? Is he not the same race as the people on Utapau? Like, why is his head so weirdly shaped, and why could they do that back then? Actually, that is a question I have though with the prop design. Did somebody who was originally on the Lucasfilm, like, not prop design, but costume design, were they like, did they leave or something? Because, or is it because of like the length of time they're doing this? Because I know that, you know, both Ahsoka's tendrils, like the Leku or whatever, I forget what the horn parts are called, but those are too short, and I know that they kind of explained that they had some trouble in the prop department for that. But then we got Shakti in the movies. Like, is there something different about, like, why were we able to achieve Shakti but not achieve Ahsoka? Further, you know, same question, why were we able to achieve the Utapauans or whatever they're called, but not the Grand Inquisitor? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Is it a different costume designer, or does it need to be more practical because they're, like, in the show more, or, like, what's the deal with that?
I keep coming up with things last minute. My audio is going to sound terrible because all of my fans are on right now. So sorry about that. Maybe I won't even try to master this audio. I don't know. But also just, I love that they've been doing a bunch of, you know, the Gaming Greats line and the Star Wars Legends line of the Black Series figures. I want them to do more of those. And where are our Black Series figures of Carson Teva, Jack Porkins, Jason Solo? I have Jaina Solo. Thankfully, they did do one of Jaina Solo. So I want Jason Solo and Ben Skywalker, and probably Anakin Solo, though I'm a little bit less partial to him than the others. And Alana Solo, Tenno Ka would be cool, though they seem a little bit less likely. And Anakin Solo also seems a little bit not super likely, but Jason Solo especially, I feel like, though. I mean, I guess we'll be getting a Jason Syndulla one eventually, but we'll see.
Also, another last-minute addition. If you guys have any crazy dreams or wants from Star Wars, I'm really curious about hearing what those might be. So leave your craziest Star Wars wishes down in the comments below. I love Star Wars. I love Star Wars Legends most of all. Disney canon is getting there, but they still have a long way to go yet, or a lot of hoops to jump through. But I believe in Filoni. I think if anyone has the ability to untangle this mess that Disney's made, it's him. Star Wars Legends had its issues, and it didn't always take itself seriously.
Manjulpa!
That was also part of the fun. At the very least, it wasn't broke. I guess the last thing I'll say, if there's anything to take away, it's this. If it ain't broke, don't try to fix it. This is Chiin Ferno, signing off. Here we go again with the lightsaber switching. I wasn't sure which one I necessarily wanted to use, because green makes sense, because Luke and Ahsoka had green, and it's just a pretty standard. It's my favorite lightsaber, one of my favorite lightsaber colors. But then I think I'm going to go with purple, because I'm specifically going to be talking about the new Jedi Order, and purple, although I'm using Revan's lightsaber, it brings to mind Mara Jade and Jaina Solo. Suddenly realizing I don't know where my Luke helmet is. I used to have one. I mean, I do have one. But I haven't seen it in a while. I did not get all my assets properly together before doing this video. I really should have been more prepared. I'll maybe just have to forego the Luke representation then, as I discuss this. The batteries might be dead. I may just have to forego lighting up the lightsabers entirely. Yeah, both of these seem like they're dead. Okay. That some kind of replacement needs to be made in order for the Jedi Order. Now, as far as Luke Skywalker adjacent replacement. And finally, there's the problem.